On to our first partner session. This will be a remote session. And one of the things that's really interesting is if we look at where we're going, you just heard John there talking about the case from Coventry. And, that merger of policy, infrastructure and technology are very, very important. So I'd like you to please welcome, unfortunately they can't be here in person, but they're all dialing in, our first panel this morning. And we have Clare Jackson from Gemserv, we have Sam Peacock from SSE, and Basil Scarsella, the CEO of UK Power Networks. Please welcome our panel, please. Hello, can you hear us? Earth calling.
Yes, good morning.
Morning, Claire. Morning, Basil.
Morning. Morning all. Morning, Tim.
And Sam. Sam, you look like you're in a call centre. I like it.
I know, these trendy headphones just for you.
Thanks. Claire, you would have been here, but you're a proof of that everything's working on test and trace. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. I got pinged by Track and Trace this weekend, so unfortunately I'm encased in my kitchen at home. Would have loved to have been there.
Stay safe. That's the main thing. If I could start with you, Claire, actually. If I could give you all of you, about sort of a couple of minutes, just to explain what net zero means for you and your organisation. So, Claire, can I ask you first? What's it mean for Gemserv?
Yeah, sure. So I guess as a little bit of an introduction, my name is Claire. I'm head of innovation at Gemserv Low Carbon, which means that I get to look after all of our most interesting work on the most interesting technologies. So I look after things like hydrogen and smart systems. But for us, we're really keen to, we work with industry and government on supporting that transition to net zero. We are policy geeks, we're technology geeks, so really looking forward to this discussion on that sort of interface between those two things. But really, I mean, from my perspective, net zero is this huge challenge. I think it's really easy for us to underestimate just how big that challenge is. That move from 80% to net zero is it's monumental. The speed that we now have to move at. Previously we had to hit 80% by 2050. The CCC is now projecting we've got to hit that target by 2035. We just lost 15 years. We had 30 and now we've got 15. So I think for us, it represents this huge challenge, and one that we are, really excited to be a part of, helping industry, helping companies, helping governments to meet that strategy. So a challenge to be stepped up to is what I would say that net zero represents for us.
Excellent. And Sam, for SSE, and a huge company, many people will know it so well. Is it difficult to pin down what it means? Because when you're sitting there and you're in a massive organisation, we know the commitments the company has made. What does it mean on a day-to-day level?
I think hopefully the audio is okay, and good morning everyone. I mean, I think for us it's really interesting on two levels, net zero, I suppose. I mean, first of all, it's actually nice having COP26 in SSE's sort of backyard in Scotland, which hopefully will be a successful thing later on in the year. Hopefully that'll be as physical as possible, and hopefully that'll be the sort of the centerpiece of
Sam, sorry to interrupt. Can I just get you to
this year and create a bit of a
can I get you to legacy. Just move your microphone a little away from your mic, just a tad, because it's getting a bit of popping. Try that.
Okay, is that any better?
Yeah, hopefully that's clearer. Is that right? Is that better for everyone? Yeah, cool. Carry on. Sorry to interrupt you.
Apologies. Don't want to make everyone deaf or whatever. I mean, net zero is, I suppose, central to also to SSE's strategy. I mean, if you think about what we're trying to do, we're trying to build the world's largest offshore wind farm at Dogger Bank. We're building Scotland's largest offshore wind farm at Seagreen, and we're going to build hopefully lots more stuff. I suppose I hope that net zero and COP26 this year end up leading to kind of an extra bit of maybe steroids in the net zero policy environment. I'm hoping that we can start to move forward things like system flexibility that I think have been a bit slow. And I hope that we can almost match the successes that we've had in offshore wind in other areas of the sector, be it heat, be it transport, be it things like CCUS. So net zero, I suppose, is critical to us, but I think we've got quite a lot to do as a country to get that policy framework in place, which I guess we'll talk about a little bit later soon.
Thanks. And Basil, obviously for UK Power Networks, one of the DNOs doing the transition, what do you see your role as an organisation regarding net zero?
Yeah, thanks. And good morning, everyone. We see our role in transition to net zero over three fronts. Firstly, as an organisation, how are we going to get to net zero, and what are we doing about it? We're pleased to say that we're the first DNO to actually achieve science-based target initiative approval. And so we've got UK Power Networks is planning to achieve net zero across at least scope 1 and scope 3 emissions, scope 1 being direct emission and scope 3 being emission from the supply chain by 2028. So that's the first front. As an organisation, when are we going to get to achieving net zero? The second front, we have some 6,000 employees, and I think we see it as our responsibility to help them transition to net zero, and that's at the early stages, but we're working with them to facilitate charging of electric vehicles and also heat electrification. The final bit for UK Power Networks, which is probably the most important contribution that we make as an electricity distributor to net zero, is that we enable the transition of the economy to net zero. What do we mean by that? In order to achieve, for the economy to achieve net zero, we must firstly decarbonise electricity. Secondly, we decarbonise transport, and then heat. In all of those areas, UK Power Networks and the electricity distribution network plays a vital role in enabling that to happen. When it comes to decarbonising electricity in terms of connecting renewables, a lot of the renewables and electricity has already decarbonised its output by some 50%. A lot of the new generation, renewable generation, solar, wind, is connected to our network. As we then move to decarbonising transport and heat, again, it's likely that that's going to happen from transport, certainly electric vehicles. And when it comes to heat, we expect, and the government is starting to make moves towards electrification of heat. So in all of those areas, the electricity network, and therefore UK Power Networks, will be the enabler to the economy transitioning to net zero. So this is an exciting time to be involved in the electricity industry, because we'll be part of a significant change in the economy, which will be reflected upon for decades and arguably centuries to come. So this is exciting to be involved, and for young people to join what traditionally has been the utility industry is somewhat boring.
Yeah, and I think that's true. It's a revolutionary time. Sam, when it comes to it, you look at it and you think, actually, you've got to give government credit here, because, Theresa May's last act before she left was to put in the target. Then Boris has gone for it. We've seen what's happening. How important are the policy drivers? And the question that I'll put to you is, how much is it you wait for policy, or how much do you as an organisation jump ahead, work with government, say, actually, let's do this, and then make this policy? How do you see it for business in large, and particularly a large company like SSE?
Thanks, Sumit. I mean, just and hopefully the audio is okay. I'll speak a little bit quieter, but correct me if I'm blaring you down. I mean, I suppose in terms of the policy environment, we were quite supportive. Normally, often we've been heard criticising government policy, to be honest, not going fast enough or hard enough. But the 10-point plan, the Energy White Paper, they really have set an extra gear behind offshore wind, an extra gear behind CCUS. And I think that as long as that ambition is then matched by the regulator through distribution price controls, it was quite difficult during transmission price controls, we should have a policy framework that can can drive on and meet net zero. But I think your point is a really interesting one. If like how much is it on government and how much is it on companies? I'll give you a brief example. We, like Basil, talk well there about science-based targets for distribution, which is distribution business, which is excellent. We've done that in our transmission business, and at the corporate level have one, which basically means we're tying ourselves down to getting to net zero by 2050 or hopefully before. And we've done other things like targets on how many renewables we'll deploy and also on how many EVs will connect to the network. So we've tried to get that balance you're talking about, Sumit, right, of trying to drive some stuff ourselves while also, but I would say the government policy framework is critical because there will always be some laggards in certain sectors, and therefore you do need something there as an underpin to make sure that we actually get there. But I have to say you're dead right. I hate it when companies just moan about government. You've got to do some stuff yourself. So totally agree with you.
We don't do much moaning here. Well, I might do, but my point people don't. Claire, I mean, your area of expertise is technology. And I suppose, Basil said, a fairly dull sector. Now this is the time for people to be excited about the energy and electricity sector. Are we sort of beholden to technology to make these leaps? Or are we actually saying the technology is already there, it might be in the labs or whatever, and it's about sort of businesses working and enabling those technologies to come to the fore? Because that's the thing one of the government's looking at is business and unis and that kind of, white hot heat of science, as Boris calls it, all that sort of stuff. Where do you see our technology play as a nation, particularly right now?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. I mean, so as you pointed out there, the government is doing a lot of stuff well at the moment. They've recognized the importance of innovation. We're seeing the sort of £1 billion net zero innovation fund. I mean, that's a great commitment. We don't know exactly how that's sort of going to play out, what exactly that's going to be spent on, but that's a really great commitment. I think it's probably worth saying that there's probably no technologies that are going to help us meet net zero in any kind of meaningful way that we don't have some sort of sight of at the moment. There's sort of very few technologies that go from nothing through to sort of large scale deployment, certainly energy technologies in that kind of sort of time frame. So I think, waiting around for brand new technologies that, might sort of save the day, I think is a little naive. I think we have to work with the technologies that we've got. And I think, again, it's that balance. I think that net zero is this incredible challenge. And as such, we kind of have to put the pedal to the floor with everything that we've got. I mean, a sort of classic example that we come across sort of time and time again at the moment is this debate around when it comes to heat. Should we be using heat pumps or should we be using hydrogen? This classic debate that we're seeing taking place at the moment. And for me, that debate is a bit of a sort of moot point in many ways. Like, we don't necessarily have to decide or have to know what our 2050 scenario is going to look like to know that actually we've got to deploy heat pumps as fast as is humanly possible, regardless of what happens to hydrogen. Similarly, we know that there are going to be some homes for which heat pumps aren't suitable, so we are going to need other solutions. So let's get on and do hydrogen trials and hydrogen pilots and try and scale that technology as quickly as possible. So I think, we see quite often this sort of pitting of technologies against each other and this sort of competitive nature of different decarbonisation pathways. And I think, and I know it's a difficult answer in many ways, but actually we've got to press on forwards as quickly as possible, both with our sort of innovation on those sort of earlier stage technologies, and also on the deployment of those more mature, more proven technologies. Because actually we need as many missiles as we possibly can if we're going to try and meet this incredibly challenging target.
Yeah. Basil, for you, you're sitting there, a young man that you are, Basil, and you're looking at the future and you're thinking about this challenge. Let's look at, one of the big cities in your patch, London, obviously, and I need a bit, but the electric car challenge. Do you have to second guess the technology? How do you balance where you're going to put more wires, more cables? Because we don't know what technology we might use in. It's like kind of, I think we were talking earlier with Ben, he had a laser disc. No one's got those anymore, So how do you second guess what technologies might need your infrastructure in, say, 5 or 10 years' time?
Yeah, firstly, I haven't been called a young man for a while, but thanks, Sumit. Uh, you take London as an example. Now, UK Power Networks' job is to ensure that electricity capacity is always there available to cater for any sort of development that happens in London, or for that matter, any other part of our service territory. Therefore, so when we're talking about electric vehicles, it's not a matter of second guessing where the development and what technology is going to be. We're not responsible, for example, for installing charging infrastructure, but we work very closely with the likes of TfL, for example. We've done a study with Transport for London to see where it's most economic for us to reinforce the network, and where it's suitable, obviously, for Transport for London to determine where charging facilities for buses are going to happen. Similarly, we work with local authority, we work with the GLA to understand taxis, where are charging hubs going to emerge in London, so that we can reinforce the network, if you like, ahead of need, to ensure that we don't get in the way of, as I said, of enabling the transition to net zero. Because to get to net zero, in simple terms, we got to take carbon out of, as I said earlier, of transport, electricity, heat, and replace it with electricity. It means electricity demand will increase. It means our network, where necessary, needs to be reinforced to cater for that additional demand. But what's also important is that our first solution should not be the reinforcement of the network, but should be utilising or increase the asset utilisation of the network we already have. For example, charging of vehicles, we should be working, we are working with suppliers to encourage customers to charge their vehicles at 2 a.m. rather than at 5 p.m. or 7 a.m., because that will mean we will not have to reinforce the network, which would be lower cost to consumers. Generators will not have to build more generating capacity, because at 2 a.m. the generator would be more than likely idle. Therefore, all of that, we need to work with the community, we need to work with the various technologies that are available to make sure that we deliver. The networks do not stand in the way of enabling net zero, but at the same time deliver at the lowest possible cost to consumers.
Let me ask all three of you a question, which is, if you look at where we are now, would you say the term sustainability, as dare I say, passed its sell-by date? Has net zero done something slightly different, which is, because it's a date to get to, it's a target, and businesses, people like to go for targets. Do you think it's changed the way, we've been talking about kind of, the trilemma, no one talks about it now, but the sustainability part we've been talking about for decades. Is net zero really now something that's focused minds? I'll start with you, Claire. What do you think?
I think that we've definitely seen that. I think it's definitely put the focus on carbon emissions. I think sustainability has a slightly more holistic kind of feel to it. So I think it's very much sort of put the focus on carbon emissions. We've been probably working with more organizations now that are looking to set targets and then looking for strategies on how on earth you meet those targets. So I think that's definitely true. I think it's also probably worth noting, I think this is sort of a slightly tangential point, but there's a lot of sort of rhetoric now also, we've got net zero, but also around sort of building back better. And I think, we really need to see how that actually works in action when it comes to businesses. There's been a lot of businesses that have been hit really badly by COVID. And the focus at the moment is on survival rather
Yeah,
than
absolutely.
decarbonizing.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a little bit of work that we need to do to try and sort of help those businesses. You know, as I said, we're working with a number of organizations that know they need to meet net zero. You know, they might have set net zero targets, but they really need some help in terms of, you know, what technologies and what combinations, what kind of timescales, what costs. It can be really confusing. And you know, there are some organizations that are in the fortunate position of having resource to invest in that kind of exercise, but there are a lot that at the moment don't. And so I think there's some work that we need to do on a sort of national scale to help businesses to decarbonize. But yeah, I guess, as I said, back to that initial point, yeah, I think we're seeing more emissions targets being set in terms of net zero, for sure.
Sam, I mean, your CEO has been very sort of vocal on this. Do you think it's focused minds? In your organisations, it focused minds?
I think it has. I mean, just to your sort of your previous question, I kind of think that in the time I've been at SSE, which is about 11, 12 years now, you know, there was sort of sustainability was kind of first called sort of CSR and doing good things or whatever, and now it's part of the business model. I mean, if you think about it now, I mean, I think as a future to corporation, it sounds a bit I don't know, uppity, but they did quite an interesting piece where they were talking about the purpose of business being, you know, finding profitable solutions to the problems of people and planet, which, while being a bit of a mouthful to spit out, does largely sort of shows you how companies have kind of started to reorientate themselves towards solving societal issues. And I think at SSE and others actually on this call, I think the energy sector's actually had to move earlier than most on it because of the
Yes.
nature of how, as Basil was talking about, how, you know, electricity is effectively underpinning everything. So I think energy companies have been at the front end of moving towards sustainability being right at the heart of their business model. And I guess the interesting thing for me is how do the other institutions keep pace with net zero? Because I'm now seeing a bunch of companies with science-based targets, really ambitious ways of reaching net zero themselves. But, you know, should the Ofgem, the energy regulator, have a pure remit that says net zero is the driving underlying issue? Should Ofwat, should other institutions have net zero right at the heart of it, with perhaps some of those other important elements around the trilemma or other things that those organisations do sitting that level beneath it? I think that's an interesting question raised by sort of your comment,
Yeah.
Sumit.
Yeah. Basil, just briefly, has it changed your mind, the net
Yeah.
zero target as a CEO?
Yeah, no question about that. It's changed everybody's mind. I mean, human nature being what it is, my view is you set a target, we all want to strive to succeed. And to be fair, the government has done a great job, I think, over the last 12 months to 2 years to make sure that net zero and transition to low carbon has become an issue. You think about it, that we were the first country to legally commit to net zero by 2050. That was followed by the Prime Minister 10-point plan. Then there's the Energy White Paper, which expanded on 10. Now we've got COP26 coming up in, as Sam has said, up in Scotland. And I think the UK, I think, has an opportunity to lead the world again. You know, but we also had the re-election or the election of Biden as president of the US, and therefore the US is now, as we saw in the latest, in the G7 again in the UK. We saw that the US back on board when it comes to transitioning to net zero. So I think we're seeing the majority of the civilized world actually jumping on board with net zero. So you can't go to too many conferences these days where net zero is not the major issue. So credit to the government, credit to the regulators, at least in the electricity side, for actually setting targets. But again, from a electricity distribution perspective, we're in the throes of preparing our sort of plan for 2023 to 2028, and we're setting specific targets that we expect how many EVs are going to be coming online, how many heat pumps are going to come online, what capacity is required, etc. And importantly, the investment is available. So you combine all of that, you combine the government setting specific targets, the private sector responding, and there's no question that the focus is there.
Okay, I think we might have an audience from the online, question from the online audience. We got that? Or we can get a signal, if that's there. I think, yes. I think, is that, hopefully that's Tom from Anglian Water. Is that right, Tom?
Yes, that's right. Hopefully
Hi,
you can hear
Tom.
me.
Yeah, we can
Hi.
hear you. So, do you want to ask your question, please?
Yeah, I've got it on the screen next to me. So I'd like to know how the UK encourages the investment in renewables to achieve net zero when there is a review pending of the levy charging, which it actually risks behind the meter investment in behind the meter generation.
Yeah. Who wants to take that up? Sam?
Happy to start. I mean, agree with you. Reviews on the sort of on the behind the meter side obviously aren't overly helpful if you're trying to get some of this stuff moving. I think on the big kit we're in a reasonable place. I think offshore wind deployment, the CFD works. You do need a CFD because you need something to stabilise the revenues when you're investing billions of pounds in an offshore wind farm. So you need it on the offshore wind. I suppose onshore wind has struggled since the support mechanisms were removed. You can still get some projects away, and obviously they're opening up the CFD round this year, so we'll have to wait and see how that part plays out. But no, I agree with you on the smaller end. It's been stop-start, actually. It has been stop-start, with the solar feed-in tariff, etc. So your point is bang on, and it's quite hard for people to plan when they're trying to invest at the lower end. So totally agree with you. I mean, the one thing I had some sympathy for the government is you were getting a bit of a flooding of that market initially, but that's still going back 7-8 years, and we should probably have learned the lessons by now. So agree with your point, basically.
Yeah. Basil, Clare, anything to add?
Sumit, I think Sam's summed it up pretty well. I mean, on the domestic side of things, on the domestic side of the meter, I mean, the reality is the government has to be flexible and therefore make adjustments as they go along. And unfortunately, that sometimes hinders sort of continuous investment, mainly from a confidence perspective. But again, to be fair, on the sort of big, sort of large investments on our side of the meter, from an electricity distributor, I think what's important that we have a stable and predictable regulatory regime and a political regime that is stable. And again, I mean, the regulation needs to evolve as we transition to net zero, but we should be giving credit where credit is due, because the regulatory regime in the UK has set the pace globally for a long time, and I think it's continued to do that. Sometimes we're critical of the because it's of the regulatory regime because it's not evolving fast enough. But let's put it into perspective, because today we have a regulatory regime which I think is continues to be followed by large parts around the world, whether it's the US, Australia, and some parts of Asia. So I think the investment, the UK continues to be an attractive market for investment. But on the domestic side, yes, we need to be careful that we don't continue to change and damage the confidence for all of us to invest in achieving net zero.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Basil, I don't know if you've got any more time to stay. We're going to be about another 5-10 minutes, or do you have to?
Yeah, no problems. Yep.
You're okay. Question from the audience. Thanks very much, Tom. Anyone from the audience got a question? Yeah, we'll get the microphone to you. And if you can stand up and then just speak. Can you tell us who you are, sir, where you're from?
Hello there, I'm Nigel Orchard from Pilot Systems. A question for all the panel, actually, just touching on smart meters and every individual's a consumer's responsibility in terms of net zero. And we're just now rolling out to a design that's, well, it's 11 years old. It was formalized 11 years old and 15 years in the making. And it doesn't include, microgeneration. It doesn't include electric vehicles. It doesn't include load control. There's so many things that it doesn't include. What about innovation, and how are we going to manage innovation with smart meters going forward? I mean, 15 years is too long, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good point. Claire, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's an awful lot that can be learnt from the smart meter rollout. I think interoperability of different systems is going to be really key moving forwards. If we're looking at an increasingly electrified domestic setting where you've got heat pumps, where you've got EVs, where you've got a number of other different sort of electrical appliances, the interoperability of those within a smart home and the value that that will create, could be quite significant. My view is that largely that aspect of it will probably be market driven, because I think that there will be enough value in flexibility on the energy system side to sort of drive those kinds of innovations. But I think it's about creating the sort of framework and the platform from which innovation can be built upon. And to that end, I think, there's probably some things that could be done better in the area of smart meters for sure.
Probably got time for one more question. Anyone else? Down here. Just wait, and then we've got another one down here. Okay, right, we'll try and get these. If you can make them very short and sharp, please.
Okay, Mike Davis, Clare Cost Energy. It's for Sam and Basil. It's for the DNOs. One of the changes that's been driven about by the targeted charging review is that come April 23, there's going to be a lot of people realising what the cost is of maintaining available capacity. And I suspect there's going to be a lot of people suddenly saying, can we reduce our capacity to reduce the fixed charges? And it's how that's going to be managed, because the DNOs I've spoken to so far are at the stage of, we'll think about what the process is later. It's a couple of years away yet, but obviously that's going to have a big impact on your planning when you're looking at requirements for new capacity.
Yeah. Basil, start with you.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess, and I couldn't hear the question fully, but let me have a go. I mean, the Ofgem, the regulator, has given an indication of their minded to position. We expect that the consultation will end sometime in September, October, and they'll come down with a final position. But again, from a UK Power Networks perspective, we're not waiting for that. We're starting to do the work now to sort of try and understand what impact that would have on our investment plan in ED2. I mean, this is not, whatever changes take place are not going to come into play until the 1st of April 2023. And certainly if Ofgem stays with the minded to position that they're consulting on, then it's going to have a big impact on investment from our perspective, because a lot of the investment that traditionally has been paid for by the developer, if you like, would actually be, the cost would be socialised, and that means that demand is likely to increase significantly. But as I say, we're keeping an eye on that, obviously. We'll wait and see what the outcome is, but in the meantime, we're doing the work to try and to understand what's the impact on our investment plans.
Brilliant. Sam, if you want to be quick, do you want to add anything to that?
No, to be honest, I think Basil answered it fully. Sorry, we can't, but nothing to add. We're basically doing exactly the same as he is, so I won't say that again.
That's fair enough. Right, I think we've got one. Do we have one last question? Very quickly, if we can get this question, please. That's a very good point. Who wants to take that one up?
I'll go first.
Go on.
I mean, as I mentioned earlier on, from our perspective, the approach we're taking is, firstly, as demand increases in electricity, which invariably will, firstly, have we got spare capacity in the network? Secondly, can we work? We will work with the suppliers to offer time of use tariffs, to offer incentives, so that the peak or the demand shifts from peak to off peak. As I said earlier on, charging your vehicle at 5 p.m., 6 p.m. or 7 a.m. clearly is going to increase peak demand. Has got to increase the generation capacity, and it's going to be an additional cost. But if we can incentivize customers to move the load off peak, but at the same time guarantee that the vehicle will be charged when they're needed, and the hot water will be available when they're needed, then again, human nature being what it is, you incentivize, they will respond. And we've done lots of studies along those lines, and the indications are that with adequate time of use tariffs, the customer behaviour will change, and therefore we're working on that. And the last resort is the reinforcement of the network, which means peak demand has increased. We need to put more copper in the ground, and the generators would need to build more capacity. But that's the least attractive option because it's the most expensive option.
Yeah, okay. I think we're out of time. Thank you very much to all of you here for your questions. Thank you for Tom as well. And can I please thank our panel of Sam, Claire, get well. Well, hopefully you're all right anyway. And Basil, thanks very much for joining us from your busy day. Thank you very much. Round of applause, please.